In the late summer, the beautiful rich purple blooms of the ironweeds, the Vernonia species, grace fields and open areas throughout much of the eastern United States. They are an ecological powerhouse for pollinators and wildlife, including the super cool looking denticulate longhorn bee, which is an ironweed specialist. Ironweeds can make an amazing addition to our native plant gardens where they serve as biodiversity magnets. There are several species of ironweed available for the home garden, and recently the Mount Cuba Center released their much anticipated Vernonia report, which includes information about how multiple ironweed species performed in garden trials at the center. Shannon had a chance to talk with Sam Hoadley from the Mount Cuba Center on an episode of the Backyard Ecology podcast, all about these ironweed trials. During that discussion, Sam told us about some of his favorite species from those trials.
So, which were some of the ones that really stood out in your mind for your mid-Atlantic average soils?
Yeah, there was a few. The one that I would say turned the most heads in the trial garden were the giant ironweeds, the Vernonia giganteas, which we would be very familiar with in your part of the world. But oh my gosh, they're incredible plants. Some of them are tremendously tall. Most of our ecotypes came from the southeastern United States. We had two collections from Alabama. We had a selection, I believe, from the Carolinas and another selection from Arkansas. And they generally bloomed pretty late. I know the Midwestern and the Midwestern ecotypes, especially of giant ironweed, tend to bloom a little bit earlier. So like that August window, September. But a lot of these southern forms of giant ironweed were blooming September, October, and we had one that was going into November, which was kind of fascinating to see blooms that late. And it actually coincided perfectly with our migrating monarchs. That was the gas station for the monarchs, if you will. They would just collect there. We actually do monarch tagging and monitoring here at Mount Cuba Center. And we learned pretty quickly that instead of running around the gardens and the natural lands looking for monarchs, we would just wait at the giant ironweeds and they would come to us. But we found that species just in general was very adaptable to the average garden soils, didn't have any signs of stress from lack of water, had no disease pressures, and was just absolutely spectacular in the profusion of flowers it produces. And, healthy plants are going to be able to attract and support more insects just because they're offering more value. That was just an incredible plan. And one selection out there, you may have heard of it from Arkansas. It's called Jonesboro Giant. Plant Delight selected this a few years ago, I think back in the 2000s. But that plant, it's the largest herbaceous perennial I know of. It reached a height of 15 and a half feet in 2022. It was just, you could see it from across the gardens, and everyone that went into the trial garden, whether you were a beginner, maybe we're not really familiar with, native plants or that, the whole movement, up to like expert gardeners, everyone would be kind of stopped in their tracks by this plant. It was just unbelievable. And, surprisingly sturdy for a 15 and a half foot plant. But that was one of our favorites. There was another selection by Plant Delights called Vernonia angustifolia Plum Peachy, which is actually a selection of a plant that they found in Georgia, growing in pretty dry soils, but it really makes this beautiful mounding plant, relatively fine foliage that's blushed with kind of this wine-colored hue to the stems and the leaves. Has this, again, beautiful shrub-like form, incredible flower display, but my favorite piece of it was actually the seed heads. As they ripened, that pappus has this kind of coppery, kind of peachy, purpley color, that same kind of hue that's in the leaves and in the stems. And we found that plant was really adaptable to average garden soils. Vernonia angustifolia in general grows in drier habitats, kind of sandier, hot, dry. They really don't like the winter wet in the mid-Atlantic region. If you want to grow it, that species, you can, but the trial garden soils were just a complete mismatch for what that plant wants to grow in. And we actually had 3 other accessions of Vernonia angustifolia, and we have 5 plants of each accession. Only a single plant of those other 3 accessions survived. So 1 out of 15 survived from those other 3. And Plum Peachy, all 5 of the ones we planted survived and looked spectacular at the end of the trial. And then one more, they're all great. I kind of have a hard time picking my favorites. But another top performer that I really like that is fairly commercially available is Vernonia lettermanii. And there's a selection out there called iron butterfly. And Vernonia lettermanii is typically is found in the Ozark region and kind of these cobble bars in riparian corridors. Has this beautiful fine textured foliage, which looks a lot like Amsonia hubrichtii. It has that lower mounding form. If you grow it in drier soils, full sun, it's going to be completely happy. If you grow it too rich, it tends to splay open a little bit. But that plant, I think it's one of those plants we just want to treat it too well in the garden. But if you just plant it correctly, you put it in some drier soils, it's an absolutely spectacular plant. And another smaller plant, so that if you don't have a ton of room, there are some smaller ironweed options for you if you don't have the space to accommodate, say, like a 12 or a 15-foot ironweed. But they're all great. I wish I could plant every single one of them.
The ironweeds are truly awesome, and I encourage you to investigate adding them to your native plant garden. They are not only beautiful, but they also draw a ton of pollinators late in the season, including plenty of colorful butterflies. If you would like to listen to the whole discussion with Sam about ironweeds, I will link the podcast that this clip was taken from in the description. Also, if you would like to learn more about some of the species Sam mentioned, you can do so by watching this video, and be sure to take some time and enjoy nature in your backyard.